The desert night was cold and silent, the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums and made every breath sound like thunder. Lieutenant Emma Graves lay prone on the rocky ridge, her rifle scope trained on the compound below. Beside her, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reed adjusted his night vision goggles, his breath controlled and steady. And between them, perfectly still, lay Havoc. The Belgian Malinois was a ghost in the darkness, 70 pounds of muscle, intelligence, and lethal training. His ears were perked forward, his brown eyes reflecting the starlight as he watched the compound with the same intensity as his human teammates. Havoc had been with SEAL Team 3 for 4 years, had deployed to 6 countries, and had saved more lives than anyone could count. Tonight, he would add to that number. Bloodhound 6, this is Overwatch 2. I have eyes on target building. Count 7 hostiles, exterior patrol pattern holding steady. Emma's voice was barely a whisper into her radio, her words crisp despite the knot in her stomach. The radio crackled softly. Copy Overwatch 2, stand by for assault team. Emma had been a Navy SEAL for 3 years, one of only a handful of women to complete the brutal training and earn the Trident. She'd proven herself in combat, had earned the respect of her teammates, and had stopped caring what the doubters thought. But tonight was different. Tonight, the mission parameters had changed at the last second, and something about it felt wrong. The compound was supposed to house a high-value target, an ISIS commander responsible for a string of attacks across northern Syria. The plan was simple: fast insertion, neutralize the target, extract, standard direct action. But 2 hours ago, intelligence had come through. There was a captive in the compound, an American aid worker who'd been taken 3 weeks ago. The mission parameters had expanded: neutralize the HVT and extract the hostage. Except the odds had just gotten a lot worse. I count 3 additional hostiles north building, Reed muttered beside her. That's 10 total, command said 7. Intel's always wrong. Emma's jaw tightened. Below, the assault team was moving into position, 8 SEALs and their K9 handlers creeping through the darkness like shadows. She could barely see them even with her scope, which meant the enemy wouldn't see them at all. Until the shooting started. Havoc, stay. The command was silent, just a hand signal, but the dog understood. He settled into the dirt, his attention never wavering from the compound. Emma had worked with K9 teams before, but there was something special about Havoc. The dog had an intelligence that bordered on uncanny. He seemed to understand not just commands, but context, reading situations with an awareness that often exceeded his human teammates. His handler, Petty Officer Jake Morrison, treated him like the professional operator he was. And right now, Morrison was down there in the darkness, moving toward a building that held too many enemies and too many unknowns. Assault team in position, Morrison's voice came through the radio, calm and controlled. Breacher ready. Bloodhound 6, you are cleared hot. The night exploded. The breaching charge blew the compound's main door off its hinges, and the assault team poured through like water. Gunfire erupted, controlled bursts from the SEALs, wild automatic fire from the hostiles. Emma tracked targets through her scope, her finger on the trigger, providing overwatch as the team cleared room by room. Contact East Room. Hostile down. Moving to second floor. The radio chatter was professional, efficient. Emma dropped a hostile who appeared in an upper window, her shot precise. Reed took out another who tried to flank the assault team. Below, she could see Morrison and Havoc working together, the dog alerting to threats, Morrison clearing corners, both of them moving with the fluid coordination of partners who trusted each other completely. HVT secured, Morrison reported. He's dead, moving to locate the hostage. That was when everything went wrong. Contact basement level, multiple hostiles. The gunfire intensified. Emma watched through her scope as 3 hostiles emerged from a hidden entrance, catching the assault team in a crossfire. She took down one, Reed got another, but the third disappeared into the building. We've got a runner, someone shouted. Havoc track. Emma watched as the Malinois bounded forward, his nose to the ground, following a scent trail through the chaos. Morrison followed, trusting his partner's instincts. They disappeared into a side building away from the main assault. All stations, this is Bloodhound 6. Compound is compromised. We have additional hostiles inbound from the north. Estimate 3 minutes to contact. Expedite, expedite. Emma's blood ran cold. Reinforcements, they needed to get out now. Over. Watch 2 to Bloodhound 6. Be advised Morrison and Havoc are split from main element, pursuing hostile. Negative, Overwatch 2. All elements return to rally point immediately. We are leaving in 2 minutes. Emma looked at Reed, saw her own concern reflected in his eyes. Morrison and Havoc were out there alone, chasing a hostile into an unknown building with enemy reinforcements incoming. Morrison, Bloodhound 6 is calling abort. Return to rally point now. Silence. Morrison, do you copy? Static, then Morrison's voice strained. I've got the hostage. Repeat, I have the American hostage. She's alive, but... His voice cut off with the sound of gunfire. Emma's heart hammered. The mission parameters were clear. If reinforcements were coming, they had to leave. The risk to the entire team was too great. 1 SEAL, 1 dog, and 1 hostage couldn't justify losing everyone. But Morrison had found her, the aid worker. The American who'd been held captive for 3 weeks, who'd probably been tortured, who'd given up hope of rescue. Morrison had found her, and now he was cut off. Bloodhound 6, this is Overwatch 2. Emma's voice was steady despite the decision crystallizing in her mind. I'm moving to provide support for Morrison's element. Negative, Overwatch 2. Return to. Emma was already moving. She slung her rifle across her back, grabbed her sidearm, and started down the rocky ridge. Reed caught her arm. Emma, they ordered us back. I know. You'll be court-martialed if you survive. Probably, Emma met his eyes, but I'm not leaving them out there. Reed held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. I'll cover from here as long as I can. When the reinforcements hit, I'm pulling out. Understood. Emma ran into the darkness, toward the gunfire, toward her teammate who'd gone after someone who needed saving. Behind her, she heard Reed's voice on the radio. Bloodhound 6, Overwatch 1. Be advised Overwatch 2 is moving to support Morrison. I'll maintain position as long as possible. The response was sharp and angry, but Emma didn't hear it. She was already gone, sprinting across open ground toward the building where Morrison had disappeared, where Havoc was, where a captive American woman was waiting to be saved or abandoned. The choice had been easy. Now she just had to survive it. Emma reached the building in 45 seconds, her lungs burning, her training taking over. The structure was older than the main compound, crumbling concrete, narrow windows, the smell of decay and human waste. A place where bad things happened to people nobody cared about. Except Morrison cared, and now Emma did too. She pressed against the exterior wall, listening. Inside, she could hear voices, Morrison's calm and controlled, speaking English, trying to soothe someone. A woman's voice, high and terrified, speaking in fragments. And beneath it all, a low growl that could only be Havoc. Emma keyed her radio, keeping her voice barely audible. Morrison, it's Graves. I'm outside the north wall. What's your situation? Graves, Morrison's surprise was evident even through the whisper. What the hell are you doing here? Providing backup, talk to me. A pause then. I've got the hostage. Female late 20s American matches the description of Rachel Hartley, the aid worker. She's dehydrated, malnourished, signs of torture. She can walk but barely. Havoc alerted to explosives. This building is wired. I count at least 3 IEDs in the room we're in. Emma's blood ran cold. Can you move? Not safely. The hostile I chased in here armed the devices before I took him down. We move wrong, we trip a pressure plate or a wire and this whole place goes up. Where's your exfil? That's the problem. Main element is gone. They had to leave. Reinforcements were coming. It was the right call. But it meant Morrison, Havoc, and the hostage were alone in hostile territory with no ride home. Emma made a decision. I'm coming in, we'll figure it out together. Graves. That's an order, Chief. Emma wasn't actually in Morrison's chain of command, but right now, she was the ranking officer on site. I'm not leaving you out there. She heard Morrison exhale then. North entrance 10 meters from your position. Doors open. Watch for tripwires. Emma moved carefully, her weapon up, her senses hyper-alert. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the darkness was absolute. She pulled her night vision goggles down and the world turned green. The interior was a maze of rooms and corridors, all of them filthy, all of them showing signs of violence. Blood on the walls, spent shell casings. The kind of place where people were brought to disappear. Second door on your left, Morrison guided her. "Step over the wire at ankle height." Emma saw it, a thin line of fishing wire stretched across the threshold. She stepped over it carefully and entered the room. Morrison was crouched in the corner, his rifle covering the entrance. Beside him, Havoc sat at alert, his body positioned between Morrison and a woman who was curled against the wall. The dog's ears were forward, his attention split between watching for threats and monitoring the woman behind him. And the woman, Rachel Hartley, looked like she'd been through hell. She was thin, her clothes filthy and torn, her face bruised and swollen. Her left arm was cradled against her chest, possibly broken. Her eyes were wide with terror, darting between Emma and Morrison and Havoc, like she couldn't quite believe they were real. "Rachel," Morrison said softly, "this is Lieutenant Graves. She's a SEAL like me. She's here to help." Rachel's voice was a broken whisper. You actually came." Emma felt something crack in her chest. "Yes, ma'am, we came, and we're getting you out of here." "But the bombs," he said, "if anyone tried to rescue me, he'd—" Rachel's voice broke into sobs. Emma moved carefully into the room, her eyes scanning for the IEDs Morrison had mentioned. She spotted them quickly, crude but effective, wired to pressure plates on the floor and tripwires across the exits. Whoever had set them up knew what they were doing. "Morrison, can you disarm these?" "Not with the equipment I have. We need an EOD team." "Which we don't have time to call." Emma checked her watch. "Reinforcements will be here in less than 2 minutes. We need to move now." "We can't if we trigger these devices." "Then we don't trigger them." Emma studied the room, her mind racing through possibilities. The pressure plates were positioned to cover the obvious exit routes. The tripwires covered the less obvious ones, but there was always a way. There had to be. Havoc whined softly, and Emma looked at the dog. He was staring at a section of wall, old, crumbling concrete with gaps visible in the mortar. "Morrison, what's Havoc looking at?" Morrison followed his dog's gaze. "There's another room on the other side of that wall. Havoc's indicating something." "Indicating what? Explosives." "No, his stance is different. This is his people alert, his rescue alert." Emma stared at the wall, understanding dawning. There's someone else in there. "Another captive." Morrison moved closer to Havoc, reading his partner's body language. "Havoc's sure someone's alive on the other side." Rachel spoke up, her voice shaking. "Samir, the translator who was with me when we were taken, they separated us. I heard him screaming, but then nothing. I thought he was dead." Emma felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. One hostage had become two. The mission had just gotten exponentially more complicated. Outside, she heard the sound of vehicles approaching. The reinforcements had arrived. "We're out of time," Emma said. "Morrison, can Havoc get through that wall?" Morrison looked at the crumbling concrete, then at his dog. "Maybe, but what about the IEDs? If there's another captive in that room, there might be another exit, one that's not wired." Emma was making this up as she went, operating on instinct and hope. "It's our only chance." "That's a lot of maybes." "You have a better idea." Morrison didn't. He looked at Havoc and something passed between them, trust, understanding, partnership. "Havoc, dig." The Malinois moved immediately, his powerful legs tearing at the loose mortar, his claws scraping against concrete. The wall was old, poorly maintained, and within seconds, Havoc had opened a gap large enough to squeeze through. Outside, the vehicles had stopped. Emma heard voices shouting in Arabic, the sound of weapons being loaded. "They're coming," she said quietly. Morrison widened the hole, pulling away chunks of concrete. "Rachel, you're going through first. There might be another captive in there, a man named Samir. Help him if you can." Rachel nodded, her face set with determination despite her injuries. Emma helped her through the gap, supporting her weight as she squeezed into the darkness beyond. "Havoc, protect." The dog slipped through after Rachel, and Emma heard his soft whine as he found something, or someone on the other side. "He's here," Rachel's voice came through the wall, tearful and relieved. "Samir's alive." Morrison looked at Emma. "You go, I'll cover our exit." "Morrison." "That's not a suggestion, Lieutenant. Someone needs to make sure those bastards don't follow us through. That's my job." Emma wanted to argue, but he was right. She squeezed through the gap, her rifle catching on the edges, and emerged into another room, this one smaller, darker, and smelling of blood and infection. Rachel was kneeling beside a man, Middle Eastern, maybe 30, barely conscious. His leg was a mess of bandages and dried blood. He'd been shot and the wound had gone untreated for days. "He needs a medic," Rachel said desperately. "I'm trained," Emma replied, already pulling out her basic medical kit. She checked Samir's pulse, thready and weak. His breathing was shallow. He was in bad shape, possibly septic from the infected wound. She heard gunfire from the other room, Morrison engaging the enemy. The sound was close, too close. Havoc moved to the room's entrance, his body tense, ready to defend them. Emma worked quickly, applying a fresh dressing to Samir's leg, starting an IV line to get fluids into him. It was basic field medicine, just enough to keep him alive for the next few hours. If they survived the next few hours. "Can he walk?" Rachel asked. "He'll have to." Emma looked around the room, searching for another exit. There, a door partially hidden behind rubble. She moved to it, tested the handle. Locked. She stepped back and kicked it hard once, twice, and on the third kick, the old wood splintered. The door swung open to reveal a narrow corridor. "Morrison," Emma called back through the wall. "We've got an exit. Go, go, go." More gunfire, an explosion, a grenade maybe, and the sound of Morrison cursing. Then he was squeezing through the gap in the wall, his face streaked with dust and sweat. "They're coming through. We've got maybe 30 seconds. Emma hauled Samir to his feet, the translator groaning in pain. Rachel moved to his other side, supporting him despite her own injuries. Morrison took point, Havoc at his side, and they moved into the corridor. Behind them, Emma heard voices in the room they just left, heard the scrape of boots on concrete. They ran. The corridor was a nightmare, narrow, crumbling, filled with debris that they had to climb over in near-total darkness. Samir was barely conscious, his weight heavy between Emma and Rachel. Morrison led with Havoc, the dog's superior night vision guiding them through the maze. Behind them, the pursuit was loud and getting closer. "Left," Morrison called, and they turned into a side passage. The building was bigger than Emma had realized. A complex of rooms and corridors, probably used for smuggling before ISIS had taken it over. A bullet ricocheted off the wall beside Emma's head. She flinched, kept moving. Rachel stumbled, caught herself, kept going. Samir's breathing was ragged, each breath sounding wet and labored. They burst out into a larger room, some kind of storage area, empty except for rotting crates and old equipment. Morrison scanned it quickly. Dead end. Emma's heart sank. The only exit was the way they'd come, and their pursuers were seconds behind them. Then Havoc moved to the corner of the room and started pawing at the floor. "What's he doing?" Emma asked. Morrison knelt beside his dog. "He's found something." He brushed away dust and debris, revealing a metal handle, a trapdoor. They pulled it open together, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. The smell that wafted up was foul, sewage, and stagnant water. "Of course it's a sewer," Morrison muttered. "Better than bullets." Emma helped Rachel lower Samir into the hole. The translator groaned but didn't resist. Rachel went next, then Emma. Morrison and Havoc came last, Morrison pulling the trapdoor shut behind them just as their pursuers entered the room above. They waited in the darkness, barely breathing, as footsteps pounded overhead. Voices shouted in Arabic, angry, frustrated, searching. Then silence. Emma counted to 60, then whispered, "Clear." "For now," Morrison's voice came from above her on the ladder. "But they'll figure it out. We need to move." They descended into the sewer, an old system, probably dating back to when this area had been more developed. The water was only ankle deep, but the smell was overwhelming. Emma tried not to think about what they were wading through. Samir was fading. Emma could see it in the way his head lolled, the way his breathing had become more irregular. They needed to get him real medical attention soon, or he'd die. Rachel wasn't much better. She was running on pure adrenaline, but Emma could see the tremor in her hands, the way she swayed when she stood still. She'd been tortured, starved, traumatized. She needed help too. They all did. Morrison consulted a compass, trying to orient them underground. "If we head west, we should come out near the wadi. From there, we can move to the backup extraction point." "How far?" 3 miles, maybe 4. Emma looked at Samir, at Rachel, at their situation. "They're not going to make it that far." "They don't have a choice." Morrison's voice was hard, but Emma heard the frustration underneath. He knew the odds were bad. We move or we die here. So they moved. The sewer tunnel stretched on, a claustrophobic nightmare of darkness and foul water. Time lost meaning. Emma focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on keeping Samir upright, on not thinking about how far they had to go. Havoc led the way, his superior senses guiding them through intersections and around obstacles. The dog moved with purpose, pausing occasionally to listen, to scent the air, ensuring they weren't walking into danger. Emma had heard stories about military working dogs, their incredible abilities, their loyalty, their courage. But watching Havoc work, she gained a new appreciation for what these animals could do. He wasn't just a dog. He was an operator, a teammate, a guardian. They'd been moving for maybe an hour when Havoc suddenly stopped. His ears perked forward, his body went rigid, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Morrison held up a fist. Everyone froze. "What is it?" Emma whispered. "He's alerting to danger, something ahead." They waited in the darkness, listening. Emma heard it then, voices echoing through the tunnel. Their pursuers had found the sewer entrance and were coming after them. "How many?" Emma asked. Morrison listened, reading Havoc's body language. Havoc's not showing pack alert, so probably just 2 or 3, but armed. Emma checked her weapon. She had maybe half a magazine left. Morrison couldn't have much more, and they couldn't afford a firefight in the confined tunnel. The noise would bring more enemies, and ricochets could hit Rachel or Samir. "We need to hide," Rachel said suddenly. Her voice was weak but determined. "There, that side tunnel." She was right. 10 feet ahead, another tunnel branched off the main one. It was smaller, darker, but it would get them out of the direct line of pursuit. They moved quickly, Emma helping Samir while Morrison covered their rear. The side tunnel was barely 4 feet high. They had to crouch, and Samir had to be dragged. But it was shelter. They pressed into the darkness, Morrison positioning himself at the entrance with his rifle. Havoc settled beside him, silent and ready. The voices grew louder. Flashlight beams swept the main tunnel. Emma held her breath, her hand over Samir's mouth to muffle his labored breathing. Rachel pressed against the wall, trembling. 2 men passed the side tunnel. They were talking casually, not expecting trouble. Their flashlights swept past the entrance to the side tunnel without pausing. They kept moving, their voices fading into the distance. Emma exhaled slowly. Morrison lowered his weapon. Havoc's tail gave a single wag, the canine equivalent of "good job." "That was close," Rachel whispered. "Too close," Morrison checked his watch. "We need to keep moving. We've got maybe 2 hours until dawn, and we want to be out of this city before first light." They emerged from the side tunnel and continued west. Emma's entire body ached. Her legs felt like lead. The cut on her arm from squeezing through the wall had opened up and was bleeding sluggishly. She ignored it. Samir was worse. He'd stopped responding to their voices, his eyes closed, his skin clammy. Emma checked his pulse, still there but barely. "Morrison, Samir's crashing. We need to get him help soon." "I know, just keep him alive a little longer." They pressed on through the darkness, through the nightmare, through the impossible distance between where they were and where they needed to be. And then finally Emma saw it, light ahead. Not flashlights, but real light, moonlight filtering in through a grate. "Exit point," Morrison said, relief evident in his voice. They reached the grate and Morrison examined it quickly. "It's locked from the outside. We'll need to break it." "Do it." Morrison and Emma worked together, bracing against the grate and pushing upward with all their remaining strength. The metal groaned, rust flaking away. For a terrifying moment, Emma thought it wouldn't give. Then, with a shriek of protesting metal, the grate lifted. They emerged into the night air like people surfacing from drowning. The wadi stretched before them, a dry riverbed cutting through the desert, offering concealment and a route out of the city. Emma helped lift Samir out of the sewer. The translator was barely breathing, his pulse thready. They laid him on the ground and Emma began immediate triage. "He's septic, the infection's in his bloodstream. Without antibiotics, he's not going to make it." Morrison was already on his radio trying to reach the backup extraction team. "Viper 3, this is Bloodhound 2. We need immediate case vac, 2 critical patients. Grid coordinates." He rattled off numbers, his voice professional despite their situation. "Static." Viper 3, do you copy? More static than a voice, faint and distorted. Bloodhound 2, negative, extraction, compromised, cannot, extract. Morrison's face went pale. Say again, Viper 3, did you say extraction is compromised? Affirm, enemy activity, too hot, cannot send birds. They were alone. No extraction, no ride home. 3 miles from the nearest friendly position with 2 critical patients, minimal ammunitio. And an entire city of enemies hunting them. Emma looked at Morrison, saw her own despair reflected in his eyes. Then Havoc moved between them, his warm body pressing against Emma's leg. The dog looked up at her with those intelligent eyes, and something in his gaze steadied her. They weren't alone, they had each other, and they had Havoc. We walk, Emma said quietly. 3 miles. We carry them if we have to, but we don't quit. Morrison studied her face, then nodded slowly. We don't quit. He looked down at his dog. You hear that, Havoc? Long walk ahead, you ready? The Malinois' tail wagged once firmly. Ready. They fashioned a litter from Morrison's tactical vest and some debris, got Samir onto it. Rachel insisted she could walk, though she swayed dangerously. And then, as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, they began the long walk home. The desert was cruel in its beauty. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Emma felt the temperature climb rapidly from freezing to scorching. They moved along the wadi, using the natural depression for concealment, but the sand made every step an effort. Morrison and Emma took turns carrying the litter with Samir. The translator had slipped into unconsciousness, which was probably a mercy given the pain he must be in. His breathing was increasingly labored, rattling in his chest. Rachel walked between them, stumbling frequently. Emma had given her water from her canteen, but the aid worker was running on fumes. Her eyes had that glazed, 1,000-yard stare Emma recognized from soldiers pushed past their limits. Havoc ranged ahead, scouting, his nose to the ground and the air, alert for any threats. The dog moved with purpose, pausing occasionally to check back on his humans, making sure they were keeping up. Emma's entire body screamed for rest. Her shoulders burned from carrying the litter. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. The cut on her arm had stopped bleeding but throbbed with every heartbeat. She'd been awake for 36 hours, had run miles, had climbed and crawled and fought. But she kept moving. Beside her, Morrison was in similar shape. His face was drawn, his movements mechanical. But his eyes were alert, constantly scanning for threats, and his hand never strayed far from his weapon. How much farther? Emma asked. Morrison checked his GPS. 1.5 miles, maybe less, he paused. There's a problem, though. What? We need to cross a road. It's the main supply route into the city. There'll be traffic. Emma's stomach sank. Crossing an open road in daylight, carrying casualties with an entire city hunting them. The odds were impossible. Do we have a choice? No. They pressed on. The sun climbed higher, the heat becoming oppressive. Emma's canteen was empty. Morrison's probably was too. Samir needed water desperately, but they had none to give him. Rachel fell. She simply collapsed, her legs giving out, face first into the sand. Emma dropped her end of the litter and rushed to her side, turning the aid worker over. Rachel's eyes were half open, her breathing shallow. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. I can't, I tried. You're doing great, Emma said firmly. Just a little farther, can you stand? Rachel tried, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She looked up at Emma with tears streaming down her face. Leave me, save him, she gestured weakly at Samir. He has a family, kids, I don't. There's no one. Stop, Emma's voice was sharp. Nobody's getting left behind, that's not how we operate. Morrison appeared beside them. He looked at Rachel, at Samir on the litter, at the distance they still had to cover. Emma could see him doing the math, calculating weights and distances and their remaining strength. I'll carry her, he said finally. Morrison, you're already carrying. I know what I'm carrying. He knelt beside Rachel. Ma'am, I'm going to put you on my back. Hold on tight. Can you do that? Rachel nodded weakly. Morrison lifted her in a fireman's carry, settling her weight across his shoulders. He grunted with the effort but didn't complain. Emma stared at him. You can't carry her 3/4 of a mile. Watch me. Morrison adjusted Rachel's position, then picked up his end of the litter again. Havoc, lead on. The Malinois moved forward and they followed. Emma didn't know how Morrison did it. Carrying a grown woman on his back while also hauling a litter with a man on it should have been impossible. But Morrison just kept moving, one step at a time, his breathing controlled, his jaw set with determination. This was what SEALs did, Emma realized. This was why they endured Hell Week, why they trained until they couldn't move, why they pushed past every reasonable limit. Because someday someone's life would depend on their ability to do the impossible. Today was that day. They reached the road 30 min. Utes later, Morrison lowered Rachel gently to the ground behind a cluster of rocks. Emma set down her end of the litter, her shoulders screaming in relief. The road was exactly as bad as Morrison had predicted. It was a two-lane highway, cracked and pitted but still functional. And even now, in the middle of a war zone, there was traffic, trucks hauling supplies, vehicles filled with armed men, the occasional motorcycle. "We need to time this perfectly," Morrison said, studying the traffic patterns. "There's a gap between vehicles every few minutes. We'll have maybe 30 seconds to get across." 30 seconds to carry 2 casualties across an open road while exhausted and dehydrated. Emma shook her head. Piece of cake. Morrison almost smiled. That's the spirit. They waited, watching the traffic. Havoc crouched beside them, his attention locked on the road. Emma wondered what the dog was thinking, if he understood the danger they were in, if he was as scared as she was. Then the traffic cleared. A gap opened up, no vehicles in either direction. "Go," Morrison grabbed his end of the litter. Emma grabbed hers. They ran. The road seemed impossibly wide. The litter was impossibly heavy. The sun was impossibly hot. Emma's legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she kept moving. Halfway across, she heard it then, an engine approaching from the west. A vehicle moving fast. "Faster," Morrison yelled. They were 3/4 of the way across when the truck appeared around the bend. It was a technical, a pickup with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, and the men in it were looking right at them. "Run," Emma shouted, and they sprinted the last few meters, diving behind a low wall as the machine gun opened up. Bullets tore through the air where they'd been seconds before, kicking up plumes of dust. Emma scrambled for her rifle, returning fire. Morrison was shooting too, controlled bursts, trying to hit the gunner. Havoc barked once sharply, and Emma saw why 2 more vehicles were approaching from the east. They were surrounded. "Morrison, we need to move." "Where?" Morrison ejected an empty magazine, slammed in his last one. "We're pinned." The gunfire intensified. Bullets chipped at their cover, and Emma knew it was only a matter of time before they were overrun. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. Then Havoc did something extraordinary. The dog bolted from cover, running directly at the nearest technical. The men in the vehicle turned their weapons toward him, but Havoc was faster. He leaped, 70 pounds of muscle and fury, crashing into the machine gunner and sending him tumbling out of the truck bed. The gunner hit the ground hard and Havoc was on him, teeth flashing. The man screamed. The distraction lasted only seconds, but it was enough. "Move," Morrison grabbed the litter, and they ran, leaving the road behind, diving into a rocky outcrop that offered better cover. Rachel crawled after them, using the last of her strength. Behind them, Emma heard more vehicles arriving, heard shouting and confusion. And cutting through it all, she heard Havoc snarl, fierce and protective. "He's still back there," Emma shouted. "Morrison, your dog." "I know," Morrison's face was anguished. He raised his weapon, trying to provide covering fire for Havoc. "Havoc, come." The Malinois appeared, running flat out across the open ground. Behind him, 6 armed men were giving chase. Bullets kicked up dust around the dog's paws, but Havoc kept running, his ears flat against his head, his entire body focused on reaching his handler. Emma fired, taking down one pursuer. Morrison got another, but there were too many and they were too close. Havoc was 10 feet from safety when a bullet caught him. The dog yelped, stumbled, but kept coming. He crashed into the rocks beside Morrison, blood matting his fur. "No," Morrison dropped beside his partner, his hands searching for the wound. "No, no, no." Emma maintained, covering fire while Morrison worked. The enemy was regrouping, bringing up more vehicles, more guns. They had maybe minutes before they were overrun. "How bad?" Emma called. Morrison's hands were covered in blood. "He's hit in the shoulder. It's bad, but not fatal, not yet." He tore strips from his shirt, fashioning a field dressing. But he needs a vet, soon. Havoc whined, trying to stand, but his front leg wouldn't hold his weight. The dog looked up at Morrison with those intelligent eyes, and Emma saw something pass between them. An apology, a reassurance, a bond that transcended words. "You're going to be okay, buddy," Morrison said softly, his voice breaking. "You did good, you saved us, now let me save you." Emma checked her ammunition, 3 rounds left. She looked at Morrison, saw him checking his own weapon, empty. They were out of ammo, pinned down, with 3 casualties and an enemy force closing in. This was where their story ended. Then Emma heard something that made her heart leap, the distant thump of helicopter rotors. The helicopters came in low and fast, 2 Black Hawks with door gunners already firing, suppressing the enemy forces on the road. Emma felt tears of relief streaming down her face as the birds touched down 50 meters from their position. "Let's move," she shouted. Morrison scooped up Havoc, cradling the injured dog against his chest. Emma and Rachel grabbed the litter with Samir. They ran for the helicopters, stumbling over rocks, driven by the last dregs of adrenaline. The door gunners provided covering fire, keeping the enemy pinned. Emma saw SEALs pouring out of the birds, establishing a perimeter professional and efficient. Help had arrived. They reached the first helicopter, and hands pulled them aboard. Emma collapsed onto the metal floor, her body finally giving out. Rachel was beside her, sobbing with relief. Samir was immediately surrounded by medics working to stabilize him. And Morrison was with Havoc, refusing to let go of his wounded partner, even as a military veterinarian tried to examine the dog. "Sir, I need to look at him," the vet said firmly. "He's scared," Morrison replied, his voice hoarse. "He needs me." "Then stay with him, but let me work." The helicopter lifted off, and through the open door, Emma watched the desert fall away. They'd made it. Against impossible odds, with minimal support, carrying casualties who should have died, they'd made it. The flight to base took 30 minutes. Samir was rushed to the field hospital, where surgeons worked to save his life. Rachel was taken to another ward for treatment of her injuries and dehydration. Morrison stayed with Havoc as the veterinary team operated to remove the bullet and repair the damage. And Emma, finally alone in a quiet corner of the medical tent, let herself break down. She'd disobeyed orders. She'd abandoned her position. She'd risked not just her own life but Morrison's and Havoc's. She'd complicated a mission that should have been straightforward. But she'd also saved 3 lives, 4 counting Havoc. She didn't know if that made her actions right or wrong. She just knew she'd done what she had to do. The next morning, Emma was summoned to the command tent. Commander Price, the officer in charge of SEAL operations in theater, sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant Graves, have a seat." Emma sat, her back straight, prepared for the worst. "Do you know what you've done?" Price asked. "Yes, sir." "Do you understand the severity of disobeying a direct order to return to the rally point?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have any justification for your actions?" Emma met his eyes. "Sir, Chief Morrison had located the American hostage. He was cut off, outnumbered, and in immediate danger. I made the assessment that the risk of losing a teammate and a hostage was unacceptable. I moved to provide support. That's my justification." Price studied her for a long moment. "You could have gotten yourself killed. You could have gotten Morrison and his dog killed. You could have compromised the entire mission." "Yes, sir, I'm aware." "But you didn't," Price leaned back. "Instead, you extracted 2 American hostages, including one we didn't even know was there. You brought back Morrison and his K-9 alive, and you demonstrated exactly the kind of decision-making and courage we need in the teams." Emma blinked, not sure she'd heard correctly. "Sir, you're not being court-martialed, Lieutenant. You're being commended. What you did was reckless as hell, but it was also brave, and more importantly, it was effective. You saved lives. That's what we do." He pulled out a file. "Rachel Hartley is being flown to Germany for further treatment. She's going to make a full recovery. Samir Haddad is in critical but stable condition. The doctors think he'll pull through. Morrison's dog is already up and moving, though he'll be on light duty for a few months. And you?" Price smiled slightly. "You've earned the respect of every operator on this base. That's not easy to do, especially for the women in the teams who already have to prove themselves 10 times over." Emma felt her throat tighten, Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, thank Morrison. He vouched for you. Said you made the right call, that he'd have done the same thing in your position. High praise from a chief. Emma nodded, unable to speak. Price stood. Dismissed, Lieutenant. Get some rest. You've earned it. Emma found Morrison at the veterinary facility, sitting beside Havoc's recovery kennel. The dog was awake, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but his tail wagged when he saw Emma approach. Hey, Morrison said. Heard you're not getting kicked out. Heard you vouched for me. Morrison shrugged. I told the truth. You made a hard call under pressure and you got it rig. That's what good operators do. Emma knelt beside the kennel, reaching through the bars to scratch Havoc's ears. The dog leaned into her touch, his eyes half closed with contentment. How's he doing? Vet says he'll be fine. The bullet missed everything vital. He's already trying to stand, which means he's ready to get back to work. Morrison smiled. Stubborn dog. Like his handler. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Havoc. Emma thought about the mission, about the choices she'd made, about how close they'd all come to dying in that desert. Why'd you do it? Morrison asked suddenly. Risk your career, your life, for people you didn't even know. Emma considered the question. Because someone had to, because they mattered, because leaving them behind would have meant they didn't, and I couldn't accept that. Morrison nodded slowly. My old Master Chief used to say that character is what you do when it costs you something. Anyone can make the easy choice. It takes real courage to make the hard one. He looked at Emma. You've got character, Graves. So do you. You went after Rachel when the smart move was to pull back. Yeah, well, Morrison reached into the kennel, letting Havoc lick his fingers. Some things are more important than being smart. 3 months later, Emma stood in a ceremony room at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. She was in her dress uniform, standing at attention, while a rear admiral pinned a bronze star with Valor device to her chest. For extraordinary heroism in connection with combat operations, the admiral read from the citation. Lieutenant Emma Graves displayed exceptional courage and leadership in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. Her actions directly resulted in the successful rescue of 2 American hostages and prevented the loss of additional American lives. Her conduct reflects great credit upon herself, Naval Special Warfare Command, and the United States Navy. The room erupted in applause. Emma's teammates were there, the other SEALs she'd deployed with, the ones who'd initially thought she couldn't hack it, who doubted whether a woman belonged in the teams. They weren't doubting anymore. Morrison was there too, in his dress uniform, Havoc sitting alertly at his side. The dog still had a slight limp, but he'd been cleared for duty. He wore his tactical harness, the patches indicating his deployments and commendations. And in the front row, tears streaming down her face, was Rachel Hartley. After the ceremony, Rachel approached Emma, her movements still a little stiff but her eyes clear and healthy. Thank you, Rachel said simply, for not leaving me behind, for risking everything to save people you didn't know. Emma hugged her. You would have done the same for me. I hope so. I'd like to think I would. Rachel pulled back, smiling. I'm going back to Syria, you know, different region, different organization, but same work. People need help and I'm going to help them. Are you sure, after what you went through? Because of what I went through, because I know what it's like to be helpless, to be forgotten. I'm never going to forget that feeling, and I'm never going to let it stop me. Rachel's smile widened. Besides, I know there are people like you out there, people who don't leave anyone behind. That gives me courage. Morrison joined them, Havoc trotting beside him. Ma'am, good to see you on your feet. Chief Morrison. Rachel knelt carefully, bringing herself eye level with Havoc. And you, the hero dog who saved us all. Havoc's tail wagged, and he licked Rachel's face, making her laugh. He remembers you, Morrison said, surprise in his voice. He doesn't usually remember people from missions, but he definitely remembers you. I'll never forget him, or either of you. Rachel stood, composing herself. I need to catch my flight, but I wanted to say goodbye, and thank you for giving me back my life. She left, and Emma and Morrison watched her go. She's brave, Emma said quietly, going back after what she experienced. Yeah, Morrison looked down at Havoc. But then, so are you. So am I, so is this furry idiot who keeps trying to chase cats even with a bum shoulder. Havoc barked, as if offended by the characterization. Emma laughed and it felt good. It felt like healing. You know what I learned from all this? Morrison said. What? That the people who matter most aren't the ones who follow orders blindly. They're the ones who know when to break the rules because it's the right thing to do. You did that. You knew the cost, and you did it anyway. He extended his hand. It was an honor to serve with you, Lieutenant. Emma shook his hand. The honor was mine, Chief. 6 months later, Emma was back in Syria on another deployment. The war continued, endless and grinding, but she'd found her place in it. She knew who she was now, not just a SEAL, but S. Omion, who would always choose people over protocol, courage over caution, the hard right over the easy wrong. And on this deployment, she had a new partner. The Belgian Malinois puppy was still in training, but he showed promise. He had his father's intelligence, his father's courage, and his father's unwavering loyalty. His name was Valor. And as Emma watched him work, learning to track and alert and protect, she thought about Havoc, about Morrison, about the night in the desert when everything had gone wrong and they'd made it right through sheer determination. She thought about Rachel and Samir, both alive because someone had decided they were worth fighting for. And she thought about all the future missions, all the future soldiers who would need help, all the future hostages who would need rescue. Because that's what they did. They didn't leave anyone behind. Not ever,